Pro et Contra.
Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And the most important updates are coming of course from Chasiv Yar direction. So if you remember, during the previous few days we were talking just about possible offensive operation, possible the beginning of the assault operation on the eastern block of Chasiv Yar, and during the previous night we received significant number of geolocations confirming that the Russians launched an offensive. Let's take a look at the video, because the video shows us lots of details, a lot of things. This is the video. For example, in particular on this part of the video we can see significant number of Russian personnel carriers. Let's try to count them. Up to 7 or 8 armored vehicles were moving. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, probably 8 armored vehicles were moving towards the Ukrainian positions on the eastern block. As you can see, the Russians were using light vehicles, very fast vehicles. The main goal of the Russians was to bypass the minefields, bypass the Ukrainian artillery strikes, and to get as fast as possible to the first buildings and to the edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine inside of Chasiv Yar. As you can see at this moment, let's say on the 35-second of the video, we see that the entire Russian army, the entire Russian offensive group was split in two parts. A few armored vehicles, let's say the major part of the vehicles, start moving back to the north along the tree lines and along the railways, and few armored vehicles proceed further to the eastern block of Chasiv Yar. So let's take a look at this video. We see that the Russian armored vehicle arrived in the area, and after that we see the landing operation. The Russians start clearing the trenches, capturing the trenches. Very likely they managed to dig in deeper, and after that the Ukrainians start bombing and attacking and counter-attacking the Russians. So very interesting video. Let's return back to the map, trying to understand how the Russians were moving, and let's take some personnel carriers, some tank for these purposes. This is it. This will give us the better understanding of the situation. So the Russians were moving something like this. The convoy, the video begins somewhere in this area. So the Russians were moving first along 05-06 road, then the Russians turned to the south along the new cemetery and started moving along the Popovo forest. They were moving, let's say, on the edge of Popovo forest, then they moved once again to the south and started moving along this main tree line. So the next, then the Russian convoy with significant number of armored vehicles were moving along this line, and on this point, exactly on this point, the group was split in two parts. The first part, let's say with the majority, let's say with the major number of armored vehicles, started moving further back to the north along the railways. The Russians landed their infantry in the forest, and very likely from these positions the Russians started storming and clearing operation inside of the forest, trying to, let's say, force the Ukrainians to fall back with significant number of assault troopers and so on. And one personnel carrier continue moving further. So this is the area where the army was split. One group moved further to the north. This was the mode, one of the group. And the second group, to be more precise, one personal carrier, proceed moving further in direction of Chasiv Yar and entered this part of the city. So basically the outskirts, the edge positions, the first buildings of Chasiv Yar. There was, like on the video you might see, the big trenches, the big network of trenches. In this area the Russians landed infantry, landed stormtroopers, and after that the personnel carrier either returned back to the mainland or maybe was even destroyed by the Ukrainian FPV drones or something like this. So that was the operation. That was the Russian first attempt to storm Chasiv Yar using significant number of armored vehicles. Let's say add the arrows from once again. So that was the, let's say, the first part of the movement. Here we can see when the army was split in two parts, and then the second group entered Chasiv Yar itself. So that was the situation, that was the operation. So based on that video we have already adjusted the map. We've shown the progress of the Russians along this road. The Russians captured the trenches. We colored, let's say we removed the color in the forest because, as I understand, currently it's a gray zone, and we can say that the Russians started the official part of the Chasiv Yar offensive operation. Furthermore, different mappers also updated their maps, showing additional, let's say, colors on, let's say, their own maps, and let's say area also confirms the same progress. When talking about Chasiv Yar itself, we have a few videos from the area. If you remember, during the previous few days, maybe not even days, during the previous few weeks, the Russians were bombing and attacking the town significantly, at least this part of Chasiv Yar, using different types of weapons, helicopters, aircrafts. The Russians were using guided bombs and the artillery, of course. Most of the buildings were damaged, some of them were destroyed, but as you can see, most of the buildings still were standing on their positions, and every single one was turned into a stronghold from the Ukrainian side. So this is the situation. Very likely today we're going to receive more updates, and very likely that today or maybe tomorrow we're going to receive the first geolocations, probably on the edge positions of this forest, and maybe the Russians will publish us first updates of clashes inside of this residential area, because the Russian attack towards Chasiv Yar, towards this position, wasn't like the real attack. It was like real attack because we saw like the landing operation, but the main purpose of this attack is to force the Ukrainians to pay focus to this area, to use significant number of FPV drones, tanks, and everything they have, but to force the Russians to fall back. So it was like something like a guard. It was like a guard landing operation, and the main purpose is to secure the Russian movements inside of the forest towards this residential area, or even maybe towards Bogdanovka. About Bogdanovka, a very important thing, very important situation, because as we discussed regarding, let's say, the storm of eastern part of Chasiv Yar, obviously we understand that if the Russians want to establish complete control of Chasiv Yar, they need to repeat something that they made in Bakhmut. First, they need to break through the flanks and to encircle Chasiv Yar, establish operational encirclement, and this will allow them to finish the battle. And today we start receiving the first videos and the first updates from Chasiv Yar. This video was published by the Russian sources, and according to the author of this video, the Ukrainians are surrendering in Chasiv Yar massively. Not in Chasiv Yar, but in Bogdanovka massively. And as a result of pressure under the fire of Russian forces, also as a result of Russian offensive operation, many Ukrainians were encircled in the area and they began surrendering. So this is the situation. We'll see collapsing of the front line. Very interesting what is going to be next. Few more details we received from Siversk-Belogorovka direction. The Russians continue clearing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along the tree lines, along the trenches in the vicinity of the landfill. And today we got the video, at least the author of that video claims that the Russians, let's say, started or were about to finish the clearing operation of the factory in this area. So there are, let's say, this is filtration station, this is not factory. And as I understand, the geolocations wasn't provided, but according to the author of the video, very likely the Russians were clearing these buildings. And if it's true, if we receive some geolocated confirmations or additional coordinates, then of course this is going to be significant progress of the Russian armed forces. And the most important, if we summarize the Russian progress to the south and if with the progress to the north, we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians on the landfill either were encircled or already surrendered and were captured. So the situation is developing in this area also in Russian favor. Now we are moving back to Avdiivka area, where we also received significant number of details and updates. No changes on Berdych, no changes in Umansk. The most important updates are coming from Pervomayskaya Vodyana. If you remember, during the previous days we discussed that Ukrainians conducted significant number of counterattacks, trying to force the Russians to fall back from the northern part, from the northwestern part of Vodyana. For those purposes, the Ukrainians were counterattacking the Russians using this road or something like this. We didn't have any geolocations, and today the Russians published the geolocations, and this is the Ukrainian attempt to attack. The Ukrainians arrived in the area using 3 personnel carrier with significant number of infantry on board. They landed the infantry exactly on these positions, but the Russians discovered the Ukrainians and start bombing and attacking them with artillery, with stealth flamethrower systems. Then the Russians sent FPV drones, and the FPV drones complete the clearing operation. So the Ukrainians attempt to counterattack was completely defeated, and probably maybe somebody managed to survive, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. Furthermore, some Russian maps snipers continue updating the maps exactly in this area, and according to some Russian sources, currently this approximately the Russian control on this direction. So of course very significant progress. The Russians are getting closer and closer to Umanska, Yasnobrodovka, to, let's say, to Nitailova and many other towns and villages on this direction. We received some unconfirmed updates from the Ukrainian sources that they managed to conduct a counter-offensive operation in the direction of Nivolskaya, but yet we haven't received any geolocations confirming this, so let's wait a little bit, and if it's true, of course we will adjust and change the map. Now we are moving to Novomikhailivka. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit on the northern part of the village, so currently this is approximately the Russian, let's say, control area. So currently, as you can see, the Russians are not in a hurry. They're clearing the flanks. They're, let's say, maintaining the line of combat contact. Everything is under complete control. The main supply roads that goes to Novomikhailivka are under complete Russian fire control. The Ukrainians suffering significant losses, and the Russians are doing their job, moving further step by step. And as soon as the Ukrainians stop sending forces, then they will complete the battle for Novomikhailivka. Interesting updates continue receiving from Ugledar direction, and to be precise, more precisely from the coal mine. Few more fabs arrived in the area, and now we can make 100% conclusion that Ugledar, coal mine, and Vodyane are the next targets of the Russian armed forces. So the Russians are too focused in this area. This is the pattern. So every time when the Russians are so focused on this or that territory, that means that in a day, in two, in months, in weeks, they will start an offensive operation with the purpose to, let's say, improve their positions, maybe even to capture. And there is no, let's say, we are not surprised, because we see that the battle for Novomikhailivka is coming to a logical end. The Russians, after the fall of Novomikhailivka, will be able to release significant number of forces, which will be obviously used to attack Ugledar, Vodyane, coal mines from different directions, including from Ugledar direction and of course from Novomikhailivka itself. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in Maximilianovka, Georgievka, so everything is under complete Russian control. They feel themselves very comfortable. They don't need to rush. Everything is done step by step, very slowly, but we see that these tactics brings significant results, and since the beginning of the year the Russians have already established control over few dozens of towns, villages and settlements, and of course they will continue this process. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe.